Good morning, my name is Rochelle, and I'm going to be leading us in worship this morning. I would much rather be with you and seeing your faces and hearing your voices and hearing all the harmonies, but for now, this will do. I love worshiping together as a group, but I am going to just try and be with you in spirit and really enter into God's presence this morning, and I hope that you can too. So I'm going to sing a song right now called The Blessing, and I would love for you to sing it with me. The words will be on the screen, but if you just want to close your eyes and take it in, this is a blessing for you. Make his face shine upon Take it away, Allie, Ricky, and Vicky.
Hi kids! In this video, Ricky is gonna be with us, but he's not gonna be talking too much. He got sick, so he can't talk. He didn't get the coronavirus, but he has a throat problem, which is why he is gonna try not to talk today. Alright, so let's get going. Hi kids! Today we are gonna talk about our first superhero. Our first superhero was Moses. Moses was born at a time where a pharaoh in Egypt was the ruler. During this time, the pharaoh decided that no baby boys were supposed to be born. So they were taking away all these baby boys. And Moses' mom, she decided to keep his baby boy safe. So she put his baby boy in a basket on a river. And Moses' sister took care of him until the pharaoh's daughter found him. So Moses was raised in the castle of the Pharaoh as a prince. Moses always knew that he was a Hebrew though. One day, he saw an Egyptian treating someone that was Hebrew very, very mean, and Moses decided to defend him. But because he did this, he thought that he was gonna be in trouble. So he ran away, and he didn't want to come back because he thought he was gonna be in trouble. And then, when Moses was hidden, he heard Jesus' voice through this fire. And Jesus talked to him and told him that he had to go back and liberate all the Hebrews from the Egyptians. And he did as he was told. He went back to Egypt, and he told the Pharaoh to please let all the Hebrews free. Of course, the Pharaoh laughed. And he said, no way. So a lot of things happened, bad things, and the Pharaoh eventually said, okay, you know what, you can take them. I don't want any more problems with you, Moses. So Moses took all the Hebrews with him, but they knew that they had to hurry up. So they grabbed everything they had for bread without finishing it, and they ran away. By the time that they started running away, the Pharaoh sent all his military to follow them. And guess what, Ricky? Moses realized that they were being followed, so he prayed to God, and God told him they were already at the sea. So Jesus told him to lift his cane, and the ocean opened. We call this the Red Sea. It's still a real thing. It still exists. And the sea opened in two to let all the Hebrews pass through it. By the time that all the Egyptians came, the sea was already closing. So Moses liberated all these Hebrews from the Egyptian rulers, which is why he is one of our heroes. Not only did he defended the Hebrews, he liberated them. But we need to remember that the one that gave him the power to do this was Jesus. I hope you guys enjoyed this story. I'll see you on the next video, and hopefully Ricky will be talking next time. I think he's very sick this time. See you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.
Good morning, West Springs Church. Pastor Keithy here. We have just come out of a tragic and dark week as we bore witness to the mass shooting in Nova Scotia. And so this week, we have prayed with Nova Scotians. We have mourned with them. We've grieved with the RCMP, and we have felt this immense sadness as we think about how much darkness there is that surrounds us. And yet, even in the midst of all of this, all that we have seen, here we are taking another week to focus in and look a little bit closer at the resurrection, a little bit closer, a little bit deeper at Easter. And so this morning, we are going to be turning our attention to John chapter 20, starting at verse 24. It says, one of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side. 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. Peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your fingers here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe. My Lord and my God, Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. We all find ourselves on the spectrum of faith, from a lack to an abundance. From those who live comfortably in certainty, regardless of what they see, and those who are only certain of what they see. There are those who announce their discomfort with not knowing, and those who find strange comfort in what they cannot know. There are those who are the faithful, who doubt, and those who doubt the faithful. There are all kinds, and there's room enough for us all. Yes, there's room for the questions. There's space for the uncertainty. There is enough margin for doubt. Room enough for everyone. This morning, as I mentioned earlier, we are continuing our look at the resurrection. We are spending just a bit longer settled on Easter and the events surrounding the day Jesus rose from the dead, the day that defines the church and her mission. The resurrection within Christianity is a big deal, but it is unbelievable. Mary Magdalene peers into the tomb, sees an angel announce that Jesus is alive, and it isn't until she hears her name from Jesus himself that she finds herself certain that the empty tomb is indeed good news. There are the disciples who, full of fear, are hiding, peering through windows and standing in the shadows, terrified that they too will face death as Jesus did. It isn't until he appears among them, till they hear his voice and put their hands into his wounds, that they too declare Jesus is alive. But it is not Mary or the disciples. It is not Peter or John. It is not the silent and noisy crowds that insisted that Jesus was not the Messiah. They are not the ones dubbed with the term doubting. Instead, it is Thomas. Thomas is not a well-known disciple. He's not written about with the same detail and commentary as Peter. He's not given the same attention as others, and so he can easily be overlooked. But if you were to go back a few chapters in the book of John, you will see that Thomas doesn't begin as one filled with doubt. Rather, in John chapter 11, as Jesus flees from the crowds who want to stone him, he and the disciples hear that their dear friend Lazarus has died. When Jesus decides to go back and be with the family, the disciples protest, "Will you go to where they just tried to kill you?" But it is Thomas who insists, "Let us go too and die with him." And so Thomas is not a casual or flippant disciple. Thomas and the others are not or should not be particularly surprised by the death of Jesus. After all, they had witnessed Jesus escape death threats, condemnation, and upset over and over again. And through it all, the highs and the lows, Thomas remained faithful. But as the disciples are gathered together in the upper room, huddled together and bound by fear, Jesus appears and whispers shalom and reminds them that their work in the world, ushering in and announcing forgiveness, is just beginning. But Thomas, he's not with them. He's not there as their disbelief moves to astounding delight. He's not present as Jesus appears among them. No doors opened, no walls crumbled, just a miraculous appearance. He's not present as they look at the wounds now healing, the ones that they had witnessed being inflicted. He is not present as Jesus announces he is alive. And so as the disciples rush to tell Thomas what he has missed, as they try to update him on what they have just witnessed, as they declare, "We have seen the Lord," Thomas says, "I won't believe it unless I see it for myself." And scripture says it was 8 days. 8 days of listening to certainty when he is uncertain, 8 days of defending his position, 8 days of lingering between hope and hopelessness, 8 days of remaining with his friends, and 8 days of his friends remaining with him. And it's on the 8th day that Jesus arrives, and standing among them, he announces, "Peace be with you." And while the height of the story is that Jesus appears, before we dive into the arrival of Jesus, I want us to take a moment and reread John 20, verse 26. It says, 8 days later, the disciples were together, and this time Thomas was with them. As I was getting ready to speak with you this morning, I was reading some blogs and articles and commentaries on this passage. And one of the pieces that rose to the surface was from a Presbyterian minister, Catherine Todd. And she wrote something in a piece titled Faithful Doubt that says these words: "It can't have been easy to disbelieve. Meanwhile, Thomas's friends, the others, are exuberant. They are joyful. They are no longer mourning. They are excited. They can't wait to go forward wherever Jesus will take them. Thomas is still at the funeral. His entire hope was buried, and his friends are in a different place. Yet Thomas stays with them." I think that's a remarkable observation, that the community made space for Thomas even when Thomas did not see things as they saw them. And Thomas made space for the community even when he could not resonate with their reality. And so while Thomas's story often points us to the redemption of doubt, perhaps it also calls us back to the importance of community. Community when we agree, and community when we disagree. Community when we are certain, and community when we are unsure. Community with those who think like us, and community with those who questions and whose confidence unnerves us. Community with all kinds and in all times. And that left me wondering if those who live with a certainty about the resurrection and its impact in the world, if they make space in their circles, in their homes, and in their church communities for those who are still looking for a reason to believe. For those who declare, until I can see the wounds, until I can touch them, until I hear him call out my name, I cannot believe. Or if we take the more contrary approach of the crowds, who weeks earlier declared to the disciples and to Jesus, unless you conform, unless you line up with me, unless your voice echoes my understanding, my experience, then there's no space for you. There's no room for you. In fact, it's our goal to silence you. And I hope that for those who have encountered the resurrection, for those who have heard their names called by Jesus, that they too will have the Thomases of the world as a part of their community, even when they insist that resurrection is impossible, even when they are still waiting for their own encounter and their own experience with the resurrected Christ. And I equally hope that those who resonate more with Thomas than with the other disciples, that they too will encounter men and women who will give them space to doubt, to wonder, to question, and to dialogue. Imagine if we saw our differences, our diversity, our questions, and our doubts as a call to community rather than an invitation to isolation and condemnation. And I wonder if it's not acceptance of the invitation to remain in community that becomes the simple act that God uses to lead Thomas towards faith. When Jesus arrives among the disciples, he takes a specific step towards Thomas and knowingly addresses his fear, his uncertainty, and his questions by inviting him to see, inviting him into an encounter with the reality of the resurrection. He says, "See the wounds that I endured, see the scars that are forming. See that it is me, Jesus, the very same one that you once poured your hope into, is now hope incarnate, hope in the flesh, hope right in front of you." And I am reminded by this moment between Thomas and Jesus that while the church, the people of God, are invited to announce the resurrection, to declare the resurrection, and to live the resurrected life, it is Jesus and not us that calls people to faith. You see, it wasn't Mary Magdalene's account of encounter with Jesus that would move Thomas towards faith. It was not Peter's encounter with Jesus that would move Thomas towards belief. It was not the story of those in the upper room that would convince Thomas that Jesus was alive, that Jesus is the Messiah. The one they had waited for, the picture of hope that God was indeed invested and interested in humanity. No, while their voices prepared him for the encounter and their stories helped frame a picture and understanding of what was possible, the resurrected Christ only became Thomas's reality when he encountered Jesus himself. I was listening to a podcast a few months ago where Richard Rohr was asked the question if God exists, and he answered it something like this. He said, "I don't think you can prove the existence of God, nor do you need to. I think you simply need to be open to presence and to an inner dialogue that is initiated by that experience of presence. For those who say with some comfort and calm that God does exist, it is in response to an inner dialogue that they are not initiating, but that they are responding to." What an interesting way to communicate something very similar. Our work, the work of the church, is to announce, to demonstrate, and to declare the resurrection and its impact on persons, communities, and society. But it is not us. It is not those who deem themselves to be Christ followers, but Christ himself that moves people on the journey of faith. We are simply willing and at times unwilling responders to the incessant invitation, nudge, and words that declare Jesus is alive, present, and active. But it is Jesus himself who both invites and leads us to move towards and into deeper faith. It is Jesus who does the heart work. The passage ends with Thomas accepting the invitation to dive into belief and faith as he announces, "My Lord and my God." Jesus says, "You believe because you have seen. Blessed are those who believe without seeing." And while we may see this as a final word of condemnation or disappointment, I see this final statement as an invitation that has echoed over millennia. I see this as our invitation, because not much has changed from then till now. Betrayal remains, darkness clouds, chaos emerges, and heartbreak is incessant. Yet Jesus is alive, and this reality is intended to be a game changer. It's intended to be a life changer and neighborhood transformer. It's intended to be the beginning of a new way of being and living and seeing the world. And so Jesus says, for those who live in the midst of the dark, yet still respond to my call to the light, you are blessed, for you have believed in the power of the resurrection without the same evidence and certainty that the first disciples were privileged to know. He declares in that moment that all those who say, I believe, are remarkable because despite the chaos, they still announce peace. And for all those who announce Christ has died, Christ has risen, and Christ will come again, you are blessed because you did not witness his physical death, yet you experienced the resurrection, and as a result live with hope for what is to come, for what will be. And so the invitation to all those who would emerge as faith-filled despite the broken pieces within and around them, their faith, no matter how small, is great. For they have both discovered and desire for others to uncover the reality of the Easter declaration. He is risen just as he said. He is risen means faith is possible even when it's hard, that hope is tangible even in the dark, that peace reigns despite the broken pieces and never-ending mess. And what is more, those who believe without seeing are blessed because not only did they take hold of the invitation to believe when it is most challenging, they chose and choose to offer the message, the way, and the meaning of the resurrection in everyday life. And so the blessing of belief becomes a way of life that is centered on seeing all things become as God intended, all things renewed and all things restored, even when it seems fruitless, even when it's difficult, even when it is costly, because the stone has been rolled away, because the grave is now empty. The Savior alive means that all things, even dead things, can be revived, restored, and redeemed. And so as Jesus says, blessed are those who believe without seeing, he speaks of you and I, the ones who declare that Jesus' death and resurrection is powerful in the midst of a pandemic, even in the midst of plummeting oil prices, even in the midst of a mass shooting, even in the midst of loss so great and so senseless that it seems darkness has won, even in the midst of doubt. Because even in this, you will find those who are formed by the resurrection and those who do not realize the resurrection is forming them, offering immeasurable goodness, unfathomable forgiveness, radical generosity, and unimaginable grace as they push back against all that wants to defeat and devour. And all of it begins to bear witness to a God who is love, a God who weeps with us, a God who surrounds us, a God who declares on the third day and every day since that the light shines in the darkness and darkness cannot overcome it. And while those who stand in community with may not be able to fully comprehend or fully understand why so many would devote themselves and choose to be formed by an empty tomb, perhaps the most simplistic answer is one that takes us full circle. Somehow, when it doesn't make sense, when we were immersed in doubt and filled with questions, the community persisted, stuck it out, and embraced the questions and chose to sit in the discomfort of our doubt and our uncertainty. And then somewhere along the way, all of the God encounters, whispers of love, and invitations to believe rose up, and the call to faith was not a push by a pastor or a reckoning with an apologist. Instead, there was an encounter, an experience, a moment with Jesus. And although not in a tangible sense, in a very real way, the wounds on his hands and feet became more than a story as we finally leaned into the embrace that was always being offered, the invitation that was always being spoken, the welcome that has always existed. And much like Thomas, it is here that we moved closer and deeper into faith. So for those who doubt and those who question, for those who believe and those who are much closer to certain, for those who are journeying towards belief and those who are far from it, lean into one another, build community together, a space that leaves room for everyone, and then let go of the prescribed outcomes. And when it is just the right time, when the wounds become more than a story, but a part of your history, embrace the invitation to both experience and offer the message, the power, and the transformative reality of the resurrected Christ. To all those tossed about on the stormy seas of depression, who are asking, where is God, my rock? To all those watching the suffering of another whose hearts are burning with questions, why, God, where is your comfort? To all those witnesses of injustice who are begging God, show yourself, make this right. To all who cannot find an answer to your suffering. To all who are waiting for a miracle, praying for a breakthrough. To all who live with questions about your faith, questions about the Bible, questions about Christianity, I share with you this hope, the story of Thomas. And may I add, I share with you this hope, the story of the resurrection.
Thank you for spending time with West Springs Church this morning. What a hopeful story, the story of Thomas. A couple of things to note this week. This Wednesday's craft video for the kids is going to be postponed to Sunday morning. Allie has got something really special planned for the moms, so you don't want to miss that. But keep an eye on our Facebook page this week for more info. And we encourage you to hit the like button at the top of our Facebook page. That way our posts should show up in your news feed. And as a church, we want to continue pursuing generosity and loving our community. If you want to support ministry at West Springs Church, there are a number of ways that you can give that are on screen now. And if you have any questions, please contact office@westsprings.church and we can help walk you through any technology that might be new to you. Well, I've had some great encounters with members of our church this week, and as such, I encourage you to connect with someone. I was chatting with a friend, and she was mentioning that people seem to be hitting a bit of a brick wall. So we want to encourage you to tend to your spiritual and your mental health. Get in the Word. Take some time for solitude and meditation, and perhaps most importantly, prayer. And look after one another. There are so many avenues to reach out. Give someone a phone call, send a text or email, schedule a video chat. Even a small gesture or conversation can brighten someone's day and make them feel loved. And that's what we're all about, to be love to those around us. Lastly, we'd like to end this morning with a benediction from Pastor Keitha.
At the beginning of today's sermon, I noted the tragic loss that occurred in Nova Scotia this past week. And so I think that it's fitting, as we remember those who have died and as we remember those who are grieving the loss of their loved ones, that we spend a moment in prayer. And so I have found this prayer that's adapted from the Simcoe Muskoka Catholic School Board that I think is so fitting and so concisely addresses all that is in our hearts for those who mourn. It says this, and so I invite you to join me in prayer. In disbelief and sorrow, we come to you, O God, sickened by the brutal, senseless deaths of so many of our brothers and sisters in Nova Scotia. We grieve with them this tragic loss and ask you to welcome those who have died to a place of peace and light, far from tragedy and pain. Pour out your strength and comfort on families, friends, and communities who today are stunned and mourning, and surround them with love and support. Guide us toward a world that values every human being, and may the Easter message of resurrection give us hope to keep building that world. We ask this through Christ, our risen Lord. Amen. As you go into your weeks, I want your minds to be focused in on the power of the resurrection and on the beauty of that story. And so I am going to close with these words from the scholar and theologian Diana Butler Bass. She says this: consider all the resurrections that you have seen. They will be stories of your own life, of your myriad of deaths and rebirths, of all the times you thought God had deserted you only to discover that God was finding you anew. The resurrection cannot be intellectually proved. It goes well beyond allegory and myth. It is the continuing, transforming power of God to bring back from death all that was lost. That ever-renewing love at work, changing ourselves, our communities, and our world. Go ahead, believe. With these words, and with our hearts pointing towards heaven, with our minds thinking of those around us, and with our eyes focused on Jesus, the resurrected Christ, may we go into this week with God's blessing upon us.